Ladies and gentlemen, and I don't know, like non-binary people, house is and
you sound like such a creep right
let's try this again. Let's try this again. Hold on. I need to take a hit first. 1 second. You can put this on the radio if you want.
The radio.
This is all going to end up. So why don't you try it again? This is all
why
part
don't you
of
fucking
the actual
do it?
intro.
Like, honestly, I'm so sick of showing you guys how to do an intro.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of 2020. Benny's too busy smoking out of his bong right now, so I'm stuck doing the intro.
Honey badger.
Or is that I don't even know what sort of apparatus it is, but for anyone,
it's very
I guess this part isn't on video, so nobody can actually see what it is.
Use your imagination.
Well, you know what? I honestly agree with Dennis Leary. He said some very, very prophetic things on No Cure for Cancer in the 80s. He said, I stopped smoking weed because I didn't want to be like a carpenter, you know, and like now they have like these crazy super high technology, like this will roast your dabs at 300 degrees, but then like lower it down, and it's crazy. The apparatus.
We're living in the future.
Well, now that we've deviated completely from the fact that we have like one of our real life guitar heroes on the show this week.
We also didn't introduce ourselves, so maybe we should start with that.
Okay. So you go first, ladies first.
So I'm Siobhán Cronin, and I'm here with my friends Benny Goodman.
Hi.
And Cory Peza.
Hey.
Very energetic tonight, guys.
I'm getting a contact high.
Well, I have to go watch Harry Potter with my 15-year-old. So, you know what? Like, we got to get this shit done. Like, I need to find out what happens in Azkaban.
All right. So most importantly, this is 2020. It is a podcast.
Is that what this is now?
We've had, a ton of guests, a ton of really great guests. And this is a unique guest we have on because he's actually in our band, Lost Symphony, that this whole show was kind of started around.
Was that delayed? Woo! Yeah! LostSymphony.com. On. Can we actually plug what we do? So, like, this Kelly, who we have, Kereliuk, not to be confused with Kereliuk. Kereliuk is from Hamilton, Ontario, and I met Kelly because he was sent to me, and by sent, I mean like in YouTube format, as the greatest guitarist I had never heard of.
Yeah, and you tell that entire story in this episode.
Do I?
We don't
remember. I was smoking too much weed. I don't remember.
But yes, Kelly, the guitarist for Lost Symphony, of which we are all members, which sometimes we forget to mention that we're actually a band that's faking being podcast hosts.
Right, for all those people that are wondering, like, who are these three people? Like, what are they doing? Yeah, we actually play music.
Do they know the irony is that there's no lyrics and that, in fact, I don't even talk in the band? Is that crazy? Is that
nice.
crazy?
You should listen to the
suspension.
music. It's very enjoyable.
That might have been the best thing to happen to Lost Symphony.
Yeah. But this episode is a great behind the scenes look at the band and how it was formed. And Kelly's an amazing guitarist, and we get to delve kind of deep into his background. And
he's such a scholar. That's what I love about him. He's just like so like well studied in everything having to do with not just guitar but music.
He's a metaphor for Canada. He's like us, but cleaner, better, more disciplined, and
more polite,
more humble. Yeah, it's basically like Toronto versus New York. It's just like, very cultured, but like there's no cigarette butts on the ground, and you're not going to get like jumped in the corner somewhere.
So stay tuned for a very polite discussion with a Canadian here on 2020.
Grab your poutine and your mayo. We're going deep with Kelly. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of 2020, where basically you got screwed by the world into watching this. I have my good friends, in no order of preference, but kind of. Siobhán Cronin is over there. She's amazing. She smiles. She does all the things you need to do. She looks like she's a filter for Instagram. They should hire her. And then
my eyes are still opening right now.
Over there trying again hard for the sponsor, Miller Lite. Miller, get on it.
No.
This guy,
High Life.
High Life.
Okay,
the champagne. Okay, excuse me. The champagne of beers. We have Cory Peza, who's the champagne of bass players.
Yes.
And then I am so proud to announce, because what people don't understand is that this guy is the greatest guitarist that you probably, and I'm sorry, Kelly, because this is a little bit like a backhanded compliment, have not heard of. The guitar player from the band Lost Symphony and many other really good bands up there in the land of Canada. Can we please introduce Kelly Kereliuk?
Yay!
Nice.
With his Tim Hortons cup. Perfect.
Totally Canadian. I have so many mugs, but this is the one I choose to present today.
And just so you guys, so our listeners / viewers, but hopefully listeners for your visual eye's sake, we as a band, having done almost 3 records now, as Lost Symphony, who is our sponsor, Lost Symphony.
Yeah. It's up there.
LostSymphony.com.
I'm gonna get my CD.
Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3 coming sometime.
I have it today.
In the century. Which features Kelly, Siobhán, myself, and Cory.
There you go.
But we've never actually all talked together. Because people all the time say, why don't you have any band photo? And our band photo is actually, if you look.
It's a zombie band photo.
It's a zombie band photo. And that's because, which I'm actually, it's very accurate other than I'm taller than everybody. And we clearly know that both Kelly and Cory are taller in real life. But that's because we've never been in a room together. Like, can we talk about this?
It's crazy.
So Kelly, when I hit you up, so the story of Lost Symphony is that I basically harassed Kelly online because I found out he was amazing, and
that's
I
the story
heard
of everyone. You harassed him online.
I know. Every guest we have on. Yeah, so I was just stalking this guy, and I slid into his DMs, and
it's like,
from there.
You're the only person in
What's
the
your
room for whom
email?
that works.
Yeah. So I basically harassed the heck out of him, and I was like, "Hey, man, can we collaborate?" And he was like, "Sure, send me something." And we worked on the song "Leave Well Enough Alone," which is track number 2 on Chapter 2, which is coming out, which is probably already out by the time this podcast comes out. He made it into something that I never, ever, ever thought it could be, and then asked another wizard-level guitar player, Conrad Simon, to play on it. And for the last 5 years, I have used that song basically as my resume to other musicians to be like, see what we can do? And it's really just Kelly and Conrad murdering it.
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting thing. And especially getting Conrad, who, I mean, I've been a fan of for a while. And that's actually hard to say because not a lot of people even know who he is, or it's almost not hard to say, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it's interesting that I even found out who he was. I found out who Conrad was through, literally, I think it was the John Petrucci forum on his website. Which doesn't even exist anymore, right? I mean, Facebook became a thing. Forums just kind of went, we're not needed anymore. But back then, that was the hub for anything that was like progressive or high-level playing kind of stuff. That's where you would go to find out who's who, right? So I remember reading something, and they were discussing another player, and I can't remember who that was exactly, but someone in that forum had mentioned, oh no, that guy's good, but Conrad is like same level, but more interesting in terms of composition and whatnot. And I'm like, who's
Which is probably true, not even knowing the other guitarist, because Conrad is a fucking...
He's the most interesting,
wizard
player in the world.
I
Mysterious.
Can we also go on record as saying we don't even know if he's real as a person? Like, he could be... I think he actually might be an Ouija board just sending us...
signals.
Could be, but so I searched out a couple things. I found a couple links. None of them were on LimeWire, by the way. And and I was like, crap. And then I found out he's Canadian. Like he lives in the same country. Apparently, at the time, he lived in I want to say Montreal, and then moved to the East Coast later on. But I'm sitting there listening to this mysterious guy who has zero presence at the time. Online at all.
He actually has like anti-presence. Like if you mention his name, people are just like, it's like literally one of those things like we can't talk about it. It's like Fight Club. Conrad Simon.
Yeah,
his name was Conrad Simon. His name was Conrad Simon.
The end, right?
Yeah.
So, but that would have been like early 2000s that I even heard of his name. So just interesting that years later, I managed to hit him up. I managed to find Conrad Simon on Facebook. Turns out it's the same guy. And, you know, I kind of explained the story and we had a little bit of contact. So again, when you hit me up and you were like, okay, who else can we get? Do you know anyone else who would be?
Well, I had specifically said that you were.
He roped you into his Ponzi scheme.
Well, you were referenced to me as like the greatest guitar player that I had never heard of, and I hadn't heard of you. You know what I mean? And they sent me. I think an instrumental you had done, and I basically was just like, if you were auditioning for Megadeth, you're in. Like, this guy's fucking bananas. And then I remember messaging you, and you were just super nice and affable, as all Canadians seem to be. It's really weird. She's like, oh, hi! Exclamation point, exclamation point. How are you? Do you like hockey? I also like Ingve.
Westerners are like that, too. We're pretty close to Canada.
Yeah, he was so nice. And then he was like, well, I like to think that I can play, but there's this guy Conrad. And then he sent me this. Then he sent me this overture that he had done, and I literally said to him, "Is this even fucking real?" He's like, "I know." He's like, I had to transcribe that. And I'm like, just like, why? But when he told me that he had transcribed Conrad Simon, I said immediately to myself, just like Cory when he showed up with the 5150 big block amp to the gig, I knew he was going to be my backline guy forever. Like when Kelly told me, how can
I exploit this?
Yeah, when Kelly told me that he had actually transcribed this murderous, absolutely insane Berklee School of Music thesis that he had sent me on YouTube that didn't even seem like John Petrucci could play it, I was like, all right, this is our guy. This is the guy I'm going to harass until he decides he wants to be in a band with me.
Wow. And so, Kelly, what was your first impression of Ben? We got to hear the real story. What really happened?
He looks dumbfounded.
Actually, the interesting thing is that he and I never chatted, like literally like we are now. I'd never heard his voice for a while.
I have a way better text game. I have a way better text game. Ask any girl that's ever dated me.
The best thing is that, and the funniest thing is that Ben texts like he has a BlackBerry.
Yeah.
It's like 3 words.
I may have had a BlackBerry when we started talking.
Yeah.
4 words send. 5 words send. Ding, 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 ding. Whereas I'll sit there and I'll write like a paragraph, and I'll write
an idea.
I'll write a summary of what I want.
Yeah.
And then send it. Right?
That's to say there is a filter that comes between what is in your brain and what you actually put
it's real time. I'm like a stenographer
with you,
for
it's
whatever
just like straight
angry thing's going on.
Yeah, and then by the time you go to answer the first question, we're like 50 miles down the road at that point. It's like
what was that arpeggio? There's a squirrel. I love butterflies. Siobhán, did you see any owls today?
Yeah, it was actually really neat because I couldn't keep up with the conversation, but it made
even with those fingers, even as fast as he plays, he can't out type me with my thumbs.
I had to say, I had to pick my battles with the conversation, right? I'm
as we all do.
I'm going to go with line 1 and 5. There we go. But it was cool. I mean, the thing that impressed me the most was the energy level.
Yeah.
Right, and the enthusiasm behind anything. It could have been anything. It could have been
literally anything.
Yeah. So it's like,
Colin, can we take a moment to say to any future sponsor that it could be anything? I could get excited about anything. Yeah. You want me to clamato juice, clams, and tomato? That sounds horrible, but I can get excited about it. I like salt. I like tomato juice. I think lycopene is a great antioxidant. Like, whatever. Just send it to us. Send it to Kelly. Send it to Siobhán. Send it to Cory for free. We'll talk about it. It doesn't even matter. You don't even have to pay us at first. Like, we're lower
Tim
entry
Hortons
level.
Would be good.
Yeah,
coffee.
Tim Hortons. That would be fantastic. I don't drink coffee. I make it nervous. But that's besides the point. Like, I'm glad you felt my energy, because one thing we always say again on the show is that energy transfers. And boy, especially on chapter 2, does your energy transfer through your notes?
Yes, I already think that one is going to be a ramp up.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Actually, in fact, I will tell people from now so you're not let down. Chapter 3 is not as, I guess, for lack of a better term, as guitarish. It's got guitars, but like where chapter 1 for most people is like, you go to a buffet at the Bellagio and you eat yourself until you literally can't even see, because that's the American thing. You know what I mean? Like, so like if you're in Canada, imagine going into a place and eating 13 things of poutine with just mayonnaise.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's like daily life for Americans.
This is like the Asian kid that eats 740 hot dogs in 13 seconds. If he was a guitar player, is chapter 2. And we didn't mean to do it. We really didn't mean to do it. We had written a lot of these songs separately, but when we put this massive songs together, first off, it starts off with Jeff Loomis and Marty Friedman, and then you throw in Kelly and Siobhán, and you're like, everything's going to be a letdown. Everything's going to be a letdown from here. It's going to all be a letdown. And it goes into Leave Well Enough Alone, which is the song that Conrad and Kelly did first. And I'm just going to say, well, Marty and well, Jeff, you should be scared if you cared about moving further on in your careers. But they're already legends. They don't have to be scared. They don't need you to take over. But one of the things that I think David Ellefson had said when he came here, and he'll probably say, I didn't say that either, but he did say was the next 3 guitar players from Megadeth could be in this band. And I always thought to myself, the first thing that went through my head when I heard your first track was like, why is this guy not in Megadeth? Why aren't you in Megadeth?
That's good. Okay. I wouldn't complain if I were asked. Being
Why do you, but if you're as good as you are, why wouldn't you like find out about did you not know they were auditioning people?
No, you know what? I actually know one of the former Megadeth guitar players a little bit. And
how is Jeff Young?
No, not Jeff. It was Glenn Grover. And he's the guy that was in right before Broderick. And I love Glenn. I met him through, actually, long story, but I met him through another forum chat thing on the King Diamond forum. And his brother, because he was in King Diamond previously.
He was?
He was, yep.
Oh, that's awesome. That makes me like Glenn better.
I'm nerding out on the King Diamond forum, and his brother Sean was on there.
Drummer. Megadeth.
Yep. So this is all pre-Megadeth. This is like a few years before that. His brother pipes up because they're chatting about transcriptions. Anybody got transcriptions of this King Diamond song or that solo? And Sean pipes up and says, hey, does anybody have any transcriptions of anything my brother's been on? Because he did one album with King Diamond. I think it was called House of God. And me, being the nerd, I'm like, I'll do one. What song would you like me to do?
Wow.
And he's like, The Trees Have Eyes is one of the songs on that album, a great track. So I did the solo. I wrote it out. I think it took 2 days. And I'm talking like penciling it out. I've got a ruler.
Oh, I've seen it. It's like very OCD.
I wanted it to look like the guitar magazines, right? I wanted to look official and whatnot. So wrote it out. And I go, okay, where do you want me to send it? He's like, oh, here's my brother's address. Just send it to Glenn.
Wow.
And I'm like, all right, cool. So I do. And a couple weeks later, I got mail back. And it was Glenn had said, hey, man, no one has ever done this for me before. Like, this is wicked. He goes, I don't know. I can't read it. I don't know anything about I couldn't authenticate. In other words, what he was saying was I wouldn't know if you made a mistake or not because I can't read anyway. But like, awesome. So he sent me like, I think it was like a signed picture and 2 bags of pics and everything else. And we kind of connected after that because at the time he lived in Toronto. So I would bump into him all the time at concerts. And Megadeth concerts at that prior to him being in the band. So anyway, so I'm at a Deep Purple concert. Deep Purple and Joe Satriani.
That was a guitar.
Okay. And I bump into Glenn. And he's like, and Glenn is usually like this.
No.
Right? This time, he was like, hey, man, come here. I got something to tell you. I'm like, oh, geez. What could it be? And he's like, hey, I'm that close to being in Megadeth. He goes, it's between me and another guy. I'm like, what? All of a sudden, everything slows down, right? Yeah. Time slows down and everything. So I'm like, wait a minute, this guy I know is potentially going to be in like one of my favorite bands ever. Weird, right? And he said, yeah, it's between me and Jeff Waters from Annihilator. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. I like Annihilator too, but what a strange thing, like just to have someone you kind of know say, yeah, I'm going to be in one of the biggest bands. And bizarre. The point is that I found out through that conversation that to be in that band, you don't just audition. Like there's a million people who would want to be in that band, but they have an inner circle. Like any band at that level, there's an inner circle. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in it, you're not in it. Right? So to get on the list of people who would be in that band, they're recommendations from people they trust. So apparently, I don't know who it was, but someone in that organization gave Mustaine a list of 10 people or so that they would recommend. So they're roadworthy, trustworthy, whatever. They're in the circle, right? So they don't care about anyone of that circle. The process of finding out who you are outside of the circle is just too long and like,
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're a band as big as Megadeth, I'm sure there's people lined up from like way before.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common with a lot of bands at even mid-level bands is like you don't want to just have like American Idol auditions and call you're not doing a cattle call. You're going, hey, does anyone know someone who can tour next week that will be reliable?
Well, that's how Richard got into Cradle of Filth because they literally called him.
Same with me. I got into Starset based on recommendation, and obviously they looked into me, and experience. But
by the way, Kelly, you'll
really
appreciate this.
That.
I have a Nostradamus like photo because I want to say like 10 or 12 years ago, I have a picture of myself with John Dene from Anthrax and Shadows Fall, Mark Lopes, who's a great vocalist from this area who plays now with Ross the Boss, which is the guitar player from Manowar, and my buddy Mikey Turbain, who later played bass for Shadows Fall. And in the picture, Mikey is wearing a Shadows Fall shirt, not in Shadows Fall. Mark is wearing a Manowar shirt, not with Ross the Boss, and John is wearing a Peace of Mind Anthrax shirt, not with Anthrax. So as a hometown guy, you know what I mean? To see your boy Shadows Fall was like cool that they got to be a big band, but like then to see him go and in the ranks of Paul Crook and all these other Dan Spitz and these other amazing guitar players, and then there's John, you know what I mean? Like who we know, and he's wearing the shirt, and then I go back and Mark again. He's playing with Ross the Boss, so he's singing the Manowar catalog, and he's wearing the Manowar shirt. And then my buddy Mikey literally replaced the bass player in Shadows Fall when they left, and he's wearing a Shadows Fall shirt. So I'm like, I gotta find it on my Facebook so we can post it here. But like, it literally was like, I looked back at it. Yeah, I looked back at it. I'm like, oh my god, dude, I should have played the odds on all these motherfuckers.
Pretty wild, man.
Oh my gosh.
Why don't we get back into the Lost Symphony beginnings, and like Kelly, do you remember kind of the trends? Because it started off as just the one song, right? Was it ever discussed it was going to be this like big project, or when you first got it, what was your impression of it?
I think the basic idea was when Ben sent Leave Well Enough Alone, which I don't even think had a title at the time. I think that came a little later.
We called it LWEA. We had that title for years, but we were just like, we're not going to confuse those Canadians with the stupid title.
As we're so easily confused.
We'll just leave you well enough alone.
We had that track done. And I think, when I sent my parts back and Conrad had his parts submitted, I think the initial thing between Ben and Brian in particular was they kind of just sat there and went, wow, this is potentially better than what we thought it would be. But
potentially is an understatement because my brother and I go into the studio, we make lots and lots of music like that. And all of a sudden what came back was the equivalent. And I'm going to say it as a fan, because I can't play like this. I have no idea what the fuck you're doing. But as a fan, okay, I will quote. So I sent it to my buddy Jason Sukoff, who is a famous producer. He's produced All That Remains. He's produced, I think, Machine Head and Trivium and a bunch of big bands. And I sent it to him, and he was just like, yeah, bro! Sounds like Cacophony! This shit's fucking bananas! And Jason, just so you know, is one of the most insane guitarists. In fact, a lot of the albums that you may have heard from him, it might be him playing guitar on it. And he heard that song and he was just like, dude, those guys are smoking. Holy shit. And in fact, we were talking to Jason Costa from All That Remains, who played drums on that song. And the whole reason we got Ollie to come into the band and do things with us was because he heard you and Conrad and he was just like, who are those guys? I need to know who those guys are. I need to know who they are. I've never heard playing like that. That's crazy. Is that guy really playing like that? What's the story with that? He's a left-hander? That guy's a left-hander? Is the other guy a left-hander? Is he a right? And he had so many questions for me. Like, he should have just been on the forum with you.
Yeah.
right.
What I love about that song, and it's something that's kind of been a thread as much as possible throughout the rest of the project, is that it's very lyrical. It's not just 4 or 5 minutes of shred. There's actually a guitar solo in the song that's only guitars. Like near the end there, you're like, oh, this is the guitar.
Yeah, you're as ostentatious as Steve Vai, just shred from the very beginning, and then be like, oh, but there's a solo too.
Yeah, but everything else is very it's melodic. It's repeatable patterns, so it doesn't feel like you're just like noodling. And that was that was when I was at Speakeasy Studios with Ben doing some other band project. And when you showed me that the first time, that's why I was like, oh, this is actually not as stupid as it could have been.
Well, Corey's very nihilistic. I'll play stuff for Corey. He's like, yeah, that's good. Keep at it. Like he's never ever like overtly mean. He's just like, sure. I could see where you could go somewhere with that sometime. And then I played that for him and he was like, wow. And then I think the first thing he said about Conrad was the same thing I said was, that's a guitar? Because if you guys people haven't heard the song, because it's chapter 2, it's not out yet. But if you listen to Conrad's playing, which is on chapter 1 on a song like Requiem, for example, as soon as Marty Friedman's done, it goes into this bananas. I call it Frank Zappa-esque just because it's so weird. It's weird in the way that Frank Zappa was just strange musically, but it's not like Frank Zappa. It's not like anything. There's just runs in there. In fact, Cory and I looked into it, and there's even some stuff that he'd go over a measure by like a 30-second note or something like that. But it's so good. You're just like, it's hard to comprehend his playing, but it's so fluid that the first thing I think of is not a guitar player, but like, is this some programmed weird keyboard thing? But like, when we started doing this, where now there is straight up guitar programming and guitar lip syncing. No, this is like well before that. This guy was playing this insane level of like calling the native Indian spirits to play through his fingers.
What's even crazier is that aside from the ridiculous arpeggios and leads that you guys were doing and Conrad's super like tight playing, he sent a rhythm track for that song, but he only sent one track. And so I doubled it because we wanted the stereo. And it took me 3 days just to double his rhythm track because it was so intricate and his palm mutes are so precisely placed and like his phrasing. I'm like, this is the hardest rhythm track I've ever had to play. Like I don't do a lot of leads with Lost Symphony, but like the rhythms alone were keeping me. That's
when I learned that Siobhán was better than any guitar player, was because we got bored after, because we have all these songs, we'd do them and she'd come in like from Miami or Ohio or whatever, and she'd come do a whole section and then we'd be done. A lot of times we were working manically and sometimes we'd be ahead of the game. And one time we were ahead of the game and I'm like, why don't you harmonize Conrad?
That was one of those stoner moments you had where you're like, what can I put her through
what
that is worse than she's already had to do?
Other than making you write something behind Marty Friedman. What's more evil to do to someone who thinks that they can play? So I was like, let's just find Conrad. And you go into the studio and here's the thing is with Siobhán. So with me, if I'm trying to learn Smells Like Teen Spirit, it's like a 7-day process, but I'll get it and it'll be perfect, but it'll take me a long time. Siobhán's just like, what are the notes? And that's it. She's just like, just write it out properly and I'll just do it.
No, she goes, what are the notes? And Men goes, He sings through the talkback mic. And he's like, those are the notes.
Those are the notes, do exactly like I did it. And I'm a quarter tone off, which makes it worse when you have no frets. But she literally can go in and you can say, harmonize to this, harmonize to that. And she just does track. And everything's a take. With Conrad, she's like, his feel is so weird. Why?
Well,
wait. What was that?
We have Pro Tools, and what you can do is you can play everything at half speed. Especially with Conrad, that's a necessity.
It's the only thing you can do.
But even then, it's like
solo.
It's still crazy. Like figuring out the rhythms, the way they're like, the subdivision's crazy.
Yeah, he'll do like groups of 5 or something that's just like, how did you fit this in?
Yeah, Rusty Cooley's doing 4 notes a string. He's doing like 7 notes a string and he only has 5 fingers, 4 fingers on a hand. And you're like, how does this even happen? Like, the thing is, I don't understand him. In fact, I think the most interesting thing would be at some point to have a master class where you explain Conrad Simon to everybody.
Conrad 101.
Because the thing is, I'm not saying he's the best guitar player in the world. He's just the most technically, like, where Siobhán was talking about Japan. I feel like where the rest of us are in the United States, and maybe Canada. Canada's better than us. But we're in the United States, like, Conrad Simon and Marty Friedman are in Japan. You know what I mean? Like
A decade ahead.
they have the singularity. They already know your Facebook feed because it's uploaded to their brains. Like their hands are already like they know the notes because it's all automated.
Well, I know the pleasure of having to double some Conrad stuff.
Yeah.
Pleasure, is that the word you use?
Yes.
So polite.
Yes.
Sadomasochist, that is, Kelly.
Yeah, you have to speak Canadian to know what that actually
I
means.
can't complain because I'm the one who kind of got him in the project. So I'm like, it's my fault. I deserve this punishment.
No, that's because you're a sadomasochist, and to be better at anything, like we've said, you have to have anxiety, and to have some form of problem with something in your life, you have to work out by being better.
That stuff is so fun for me, though.
If it was
Go
Conrad
ahead.
Simon, if it was Conrad Simon was the way you needed to work it out, Kelly, I wasn't offended because as people can hear, it's good.
I developed a twitch. I can just say that.
Well, at least you're not losing your hair like I am, Trent.
Sorry, Conrad, man.
So what was it like doubling those solos? Like, explain that, because we used to joke around that it was like the computer against the chess master. Because Conrad is like, again, we almost feel like he's a fictitious wizard level player. Only, again, not even just because he's so accurate, but because what he does is just so pleasantly weird. Can you explain what that means? Because I can't say if it's the Locrian mode, if it's a sharp fourth here or something, but he's always just a little out of the box. Whether it's a group of 5, like Cory said, or whether it's just doing a minor arpeggio over a major arpeggio to give it a weird feel.
Yeah, he's sort of like, he makes it comfortable and weird at the same time. So it's like you're soaking in this kind of strange weirdness, but you're like, oh, I kind of like it here, right? Yeah. He's not like obtuse about it. He's not like, where something is blatantly wrong. Right? It's just sort of like, who's calling me?
Come on, this is a very professional podcast, Kelly.
Is that a landline that I
It's
hear?
a landline, yes.
Wow.
They have those in Canada?
Just to divert from that.
Is that next to your hockey stick?
Actually, I kind of need a landline because I live in an apartment, and that's what they use to buzz up.
Oh, really? Okay.
Nice.
How?
But other than that, I don't think I could go through life without a landline. Some people are like, why not? It's old technology. Like, what? You drop this in the toilet. Who's calling
true.
now? Right?
So I get the waterproof
I
one.
feel like that's something like verbatim Satchel would have said to me.
Yeah. No, but so yeah, I think that's a good way of describing Conrad though, is he just kind of, it's so familiar, yet there's these elements in there that definitely let you know that you're not in Kansas anymore, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Well, we'll talk about Requiem because that was the one we made her play on, and I will go as far as to say that was the first time that Conrad sent us something that was so good yet so weird that he stumped us. Because we sent him a song that had a feel, and he said, oh, you want it to feel a certain way? Here's something completely different. And it was so different that for I think almost 3 years, no one else knew what to do on it. Like Kelly was even like, I don't think I want to. Can we just go on to the next song for now? Because I don't know what you're going to do after that. And then what was it like when we recorded? Because it was funny for me because I've never seen Siobhán actually frustrated. In my life, she's so like, but she was just like, why would he play it like this? Wait, who takes a pot? Was that like a 15th? What was that?
Well, here's one of the things. I love transcription projects and stuff like that. I love a challenge, but what I've learned through trying to like do things like this and even learn people's guitar solos is just some things feel really weird on violin. So a lot of the frustration also comes from like, oh, this might be like a tapping thing you do on guitar, or like something that's comfortable based on the tuning of the guitar, but on violin, it's
or
a total
something
pain in
no
the
one
ass.
ever does, and Conrad
Or
just
something
does it.
no one ever does. That
I learned a lot of violin things, and it's the same thing. It's like tuning, different scale length, things that would be comfortable on the violin are like you pull your hair out trying to play it on guitar.
Right.
Many different things. So we'll have to talk about that later because I got.
Well, we have 2 professionals. I have to ask you a question because Kelly, if you don't know this, Siobhán is covering guitar solos, which you, by the way, should suggest some because he's the number one guy. But I got to ask you, if you were to transcribe another Conrad Simon piece or Jason Richardson Hose Down, who's more daunting to you as far as if you had to? Not saying that one's better than the other, but if you were to transcribe one, what's more daunting?
That's a good question. Both. Both. That's not an answer. But I've heard more Conrad than I've heard Jason. So I don't know. Maybe Jason, because
we told Siobhán she has to do Hose Down because we're trying to hose Jason down and 2020 him into doing something with us. And we figure, what better way to suck up, just like you did to Glenn, you know what I mean? Where you transcribed his music, transcribe Hose Down, but actually play it back to him. And what's better than being a geeky guitar player like all three of us, being a pretty girl that plays a different instrument? Would you not be a total, if she did a cover of your band and it showed up on your Instagram tagged like, look, I covered Kelly, would you not be totally like, oh my God, like that'd be the sweetest thing that anyone could ever do? Because like there's no girl I've ever dated that could like transcribe my solo and then play it back to me better on a different instrument.
Siobhán, get a cello and cover my bass lines.
Yeah, and in fact, can you tell our viewers what's the best brand of cello you could buy?
What? Somebody commented, I don't know if you're making a reference to this, but I got a comment on a photo or a video that I posted that said, what brand of cello do you use? And I'm like, well, first of all, it's not a cello. And second of all, we don't really do brands. It's like makers. I don't know.
You're saying you were skinny.
Strange.
That's fun. But the thing is, that whole covers phenomenon on Instagram thing, it's like, it's a thing now, right? And I gotta say, I don't watch them aside from the few.
No, I understand you because there's just so many.
You're on a different medium. I don't want to see another guitar player like, okay, it's cool that someone covers Nuno Betancourt on the guitar, but like Nuno did it perfectly fine in the first place, and I don't need to hear your cover of it. And the best you could do is sound like Nuno. Whereas she plays on like on a violin with a guy with a hurdy-gurdy, wherever the fuck that thing is, and that's like interesting because it's like saying, oh, I'm gonna play Primus on the guitar. But the bass line, like, okay, you have my attention.
I mean, for me, it's really a study. I'm just making the video so I commit to actually like finishing it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not even for any reason other than to learn the language of guitar solos, which I'm totally unfamiliar with. But that's what's cool about even learning. Yeah, like Kelly, your solos or like Conrad's solos, trying to harmonize with it, is you're forced to decode what might be the theory behind it and some of the patterns and stuff that's totally idiomatic on the guitar that's very different on the violin.
You were so excited during Acceptance doing his solo, which, by the way, when Kelly first got it, I had slid it accidentally. So he was like, this is out of time. And I'm like, there's no way it's out of time. It's my fault. I guarantee it. But you, like, when you were recording it, you were like, this is so musical. I really like, this is very pretty. And it's so nice because it's like hearing that your friend likes your other friend at like your overnight party. You're like, oh, they like each other. That's great. Because it's like, I don't know. I just know that Kelly's unbelievable in my mind. But to have someone who has a master's degree in music be like, this is very well composed. It's like, I guess I wasn't crazy to think that Kelly was the best ever in my mind that I had never heard of.
Yeah. So can we kind of dive back a little bit? We do this with a lot of guests, but Kelly, can you talk about your background in music and kind of how you got started and how you got to the level you're at now?
Yeah. I guess what sparked my interest in even starting to play was, actually, this is pretty funny. I was a kid. I was probably 8 years old, maybe 9. And I saw the video for ZZ Top Legs.
Nice.
Or whatever it was, where the spinny guitars.
Yeah.
Right? Attached to the belt buckle and this whole spinny. And I'm like, I got to do that.
Wow.
Right? So I remember, getting, my first guitar I got when I was 9. And up to that point, I was into, like, to be honest, probably Michael Jackson was my biggest thing. Mm-hmm. And I never really noticed the guitar in that stuff. I mean, there's guitar all over it.
Right.
But I never really noticed it. But now that I own a guitar, I hear it all the time. Right? Mm-hmm. I hear it in songs that I've heard for years. It's almost like, you buy a car and all of a sudden, and you buy one that you think is unique to you. You're like, oh, that's... none of my friends have this.
We've talked about this before, but kind of a similar story I think that we all share is the way you listen to music before you're a musician or a producer or an engineer is completely different. Oh, yeah. We've talked about, like, when I would listen to songs with my friends, there was like a transition to where I was listening to it and I was like, thinking like, well, what the hell is that going on in the back? Like, why is that? I remember listening to like Stone Temple Pilots, and they would have like, nice.
That's why I brought that out. Is because
so,
I want people to understand where Kelly's coming from. Mclaughlin actually, who built this guitar, built one of my Gibsons.
For the listeners that aren't seeing the video, Ben's got a book with the ZZ
it's the fluffy guitar from Legs that if you haven't seen, look, I knew nothing about guitars growing up, but I knew about ZZ Top, and I knew that they played fluffy guitars, and I knew they had beards, and that's one thing that's really cool about Billy Gibbons, and that's why I'm really glad that Kelly talked about it. I just got this book in the mail because he's so iconic that he made a book about his guitars, and it's really great because I got into thinking guitars were cool because I saw Billy Gibbons' guitar in the Legs video.
Yep.
Nice. But yeah, so like listening to the songs, like I was just to finish what I was saying, the Stone Temple Pilots, they have a song, there's often like a clean guitar doing like a pedal tone or something very kind of, it's noticeable, but you would never think of it as a separate element.
Genius.
Yeah. So like I remember listening to that, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm not listening to this whole song anymore. I'm hearing all these different things, and I think that that's kind of what you're saying. You get a guitar, and you're like, all of a sudden, there's another layer and some depth to the stuff.
Well, the only thing I could do at the time with it, was just run my finger up a string. Like I couldn't play it. I knew nothing yet, but I owned it. It's mine. Okay, so I'm excited at the fact that I'm going to learn how to play this. So all of a sudden, I just hear it. I hear it in commercials now. I hear it in songs that I've heard for years. But now the guitar is sort of like zzz.
Yeah.
Right. So shortly after that, I started obviously listening to and paying attention to more guitar-based music. So the story goes that a friend of mine, my best friend at the time, came over to my place, and in the basement I had an air hockey set that didn't work. Right? It was broken. The motor was toast.
Is this a metaphor, Kelly?
No, not yet. So come over, go down to play video games or something, and he notices the air hockey set. He's like, "Oh, let's play air hockey." And I'm like, "No, I wish we could, but we can't. It's broken." He's like, "Oh, can I have it?" Dude, it's broken. He's like, "Can I have it?" So I'm like, "Oh my God." So my dad's upstairs in the kitchen. I'm like, "Dad, Seth wants the air hockey set." He goes, "It's broken." I'm like, "I know." He's like, "Yeah, sure." So I said, "Yeah, what will you give me for it?" And he goes, "Well, I got 2 cassette tapes. I got a Motley Crue, Shed of the Devil, and I've got Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry."
Yes.
I'm like, "Give me." So he gave me the cassettes and hauled this air hockey set on his back 3 blocks away where he lives. And all of a sudden, that was it.
This is such a Canadian story.
It's missing the main.
It should have been Rush instead of Motley Crue. You know what I mean? And like Alanis Morissette.
That piqued my ears to more aggressive sounding things than I had previously heard, right? And at that time, of course, they were big band. Like they were, you see them on Much Music or MTV at the time. They were in the news quite a lot as well, so my mom knew who they were. And that kind of started the whole thing of like listening to more aggressive stuff. And at the same time, my parents were listening to country music day in and out. So I'm getting like...
Just to further reiterate that everyone listens to country music. Everyone in the world buys country music. Doesn't even matter if you're in Canada. They still listen to country music there. Everywhere.
Yep.
So did you get any formal training at a certain point, or start take lessons, or like how did you learn? Talk about that a little bit.
I started taking lessons. I would say about 2 months after getting a guitar. So I was about 9, almost 10, I think at the time, and I studied. Actually, this is an interesting one. My first teacher, I don't remember her name at all. I don't remember what she looks like. Nothing. I was so shy, I barely looked up. But I had a female teacher first for about a year, and then we moved from Hamilton, where I currently live. We moved to a smaller town called Grimsby, and so all of a sudden I had to find a new teacher. And I studied with him. His name's Phil, for about, I'm going to say about 3 or 4 years, and then he dismissed me. He basically was like, "Unless you want to learn jazz or classical piano, I've shown you everything I can show you." And I'm like, kind of sad, but I was sort of like, kind of cool at the same time. So I studied on my own for a while.
Cool for you, but sad for him that he doesn't think he can teach you anything if he's that level, and you've learned, because there's always more things to learn.
Oh, for sure. And I think he was not interested in milking it. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, that's fair enough. I give him credit when you get to a certain point with a teacher for them to say, you know what, man, I've guided you, and now it's to a level where. Because, I keep going to Cory, and he keeps telling me that he's better than me, and I believe him. And I keep trying to think that, like, one day I'm going to go to him, and he's going to say, I've taught you everything that you need to learn. And he's just like, here's how you tune your guitar. And I'm like, I think that this is going to be endless.
Well, in this case, it was like what he was into was stuff like Zeppelin and a little bit of Van Halen or whatever, but everything else was kind of in that range and below, right? Not below,
No, I get what you're saying.
Level-wise, and my interests were starting to go into like, oh, who's this Joe Satriani guy? Who's this guy? And that was out of his realm. So he's like, well, he's going this way, and I'm over here. So maybe I'll let him go. And
which is a sign of a good teacher.
You took the road less traveled. In the Robert Frost poem, you let him go that way, and then you're like, let's go to where the metalheads are, which is why we're broke and destitute and having to teach guitar. And,
well, let me ask this real quick. Was there a particular song or album or artist that made you like completely obsessed? Because I know for me, like the one thing I remember is I listened to the solo partitas and sonatas by Bach that my dad had got me a copy of, like a CD by Hilary Hahn and like the sheet music, and I'm like, there's no way one violinist is playing this. Like there has to be multiple violins. And I just became completely obsessed and like practiced like a maniac. And I feel like that was like the turning point for me.
I had that same experience with Slipknot. I was like, there's no one drummer playing this song. When I first heard Eyeless, when Ross Robinson said, I was like, what the fuck is this? And so I can understand, J.S. Bach, Slipknot. What was it for you, Kelly?
One thing.
Well, it doesn't have to be one, but anything.
There must have been a moment where something blew your mind.
Oh, for sure. And I obsessed over a few things, but I obviously Rust in Peace was a big one for me. The funny thing with that is I heard of Megadeth, and I heard and read about Marty, but back then it was impossible to find a Cacophony album where I lived. They
were all in Japan, where all the people that are ahead of us were listening to people like Marty Friedman.
Possibility of me listening to him, right? In fact, back then he was on Shrapnel Records. I literally got so agitated that I couldn't find any that I called Shrapnel Records. They had a phone number at the bottom of their ad.
You're the ultimate geek, dude. I love you so much, Kelly.
I called them and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, could I order some CDs? Or album or cassettes or anything?" And they're like, "Sorry, literally, we don't ship to Canada." Back then. So pre-internet, obviously. So I'm like, okay, never mind, right? I'm never going to hear these guys. They just look cool in the magazines. So, and I've never heard Megadeth. Big Metallica fan.
Can we just pause for a moment? Because we've been talking about how all these new guitar players get to watch like YouTube and they absorb all these techniques, and that they have Eddie Van Halen used to play with his back to the audience so people wouldn't see it. And this is really an interesting story because Kelly, obviously you're a little bit older than us, and that you had to legitimately call a record label to beg to get the guitar player you're reading about in a magazine just to hear if he was as good as you thought he might be because of his hair. You didn't say the hair part, that was me, but I just figured because he had fucking rad hair and so did Jason Becker.
So the funny thing is, eventually Marty joins Megadeth. And I'm like, okay,
we get this in Canada.
This is good news because I can find a Megadeth album. Right? I'm a Metallica fan at this point. Never heard Megadeth, big Metallica fan. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to give this a try. Let's just see, right? So I pick up Rust in Peace. I hear Holy Wars, and I'm like, it's exactly what I was hoping for. And by the way, Megadeth is so killer, right? Like all of a sudden, I went from being total fanboy to one thing to being like, oh, I made a grave error here.
It's funny you say that, Kelly. This is way later in life for me, but I say that, when you're a producer or you're a serious musician, that there's a point in life where it's kind of like finding out again, your dad isn't the smartest person that you've ever met in your life. You think that your dad's like an oracle, and then you meet other people. You're like, it's the same thing with Metallica. I have a Metallica poster behind me. I thought they were the best band. At one point, if you had said any band, it's like going to a Trump rally and people be like, I will vote for anyone else. Well, what if he like hangs someone? It doesn't matter. Metallica was like that for me. It was like, dude, there's Master of Puppets and then there's nothing else. And then as an adult, I'm like, I've gone back and listened to Rust in Peace, and I've gone back and listened to So Far, So Good, So What. And first off, we were talking about how, like, you know, And Justice for All is not quantized because they didn't fix things back then. And back then, I didn't have good rhythm, let's say. Now I have good rhythm, and I go listen to Rust in Peace, and I go, holy shit, how does someone actually play that well? And that for me was when I realized that even though I love Metallica and I love the composition, that maybe Dave Mustaine had a ring of truth that in all those movies, even though he seems kind of mean.
It's sort of like you kind of shame yourself when you finally realize that the thing that you thought was going to suck or couldn't possibly as good as the thing that you're listening to is as good or better. Then you're like, oh,
or better.
So yeah, that was kind of that was one that I obsessed over. Surfing with the Alien, Joe Satriani.
Amazing, yeah.
Oh my God.
I shoveled many a driveway to buy that cassette.
Is that what you do in Canada? Like, it's because Jason Leckberg was talking about painting houses. Is it shoveling driveways?
I had
a lot of snow.
Elderly neighbors all over the place, right? So all I had to do was hold up a shovel, and they come here, right?
Is this how you bought your first guitar, Kelly?
Yeah.
What was your first guitar?
My first guitar, I have it.
Wow.
It was, I call it the peanut shell. It was like 3/4 size. Acoustic guitar made by Harmony.
I had a Harmony.
It's actually in my living room sitting there.
Nice.
Very, very cool.
I played it for a year. My parents made a deal. They said, if you take lessons and you show that you're into this, we'll buy you an electric the next year.
This is such a great allegory for all the listeners and viewers because one thing that's a subtext of the show, Kelly, is that we try to tell people, like, if you learn and you work hard, whether you're a kid, whether you're in high school, whether you're just at home because of a pandemic, that you do the best with yourself. That's a great thing to do because there are so many parents that try to force music upon their kids or whatever. And really, to be a good musician, you have to have something inside you that you want to do it. And I think that that's great that your parents were cognizant enough to say, you know what, here's a Harmony 3/4 guitar. If you could prove to us that, like, you can make this into something that you think is, like, worthwhile, we'll get you a big boy guitar.
Yeah.
And what was that big boy guitar?
It was a Harmony electric guitar. That copy was probably $120, and I played that for like 6 years.
Dude, a Strat's a Strat when you first start off. I'm not saying that there aren't better ones than other ones, but like when people say, hey, what should I start on? I don't care, man. Get a fucking Squire. Like, if you are serious, you could start on something like that. Try, you know what? They aren't intonated great. They don't necessarily play awesome. That's the best thing you could ever do, because then when you get a good guitar, you're a fucking Jedi.
That's after 6 years of playing that thing. I got my first
like swinging a weighted bat all the time. And all of a sudden,
exactly.
they're like, here you go, sir. You're like, oh my God, I can play Rust in Peace at full speed because the strings aren't like an inch and a half off the fucking fretboard.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Exactly. Yeah, so I got my first RG, Ibanez RG at that age. And
there's one here somewhere.
And I went, oh, okay. That's great. So, but I gotta say, there was one more album that surprisingly I kind of obsessed over. And I say surprisingly because for my age, this album wasn't necessarily something my friends would have.
Was it Oasis?
No, this is pre-Oasis even.
Because I can just imagine you sitting in the quad somewhere, like me in 2000 in Northeastern, but you were like, a little bit older, playing Wonderwall and just being like, I can clearly do it better than that guy.
This is one that my guitar teacher turned me on to, and I had not heard of any of these guys, but he goes, I'm going to record this for you. He goes, because he had it on vinyl, and he's like, I'm going to make a tape for you of this album. And it was this one.
Oh, Al Di Meola.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Yeah, dude.
Okay.
Live, 3 acoustic guitars, no band, literally Beatlemania response to every song.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, and these guys, like, Di Meola is amazing in any context. but he's almost more frightening on acoustic, which is like, how is that even possible? So I have bought every medium version of this. I have the transcription book, which I feel sorry.
Can you read it for our listeners? Can you read exactly what you're holding so if they want to go Amazon it?
Friday Night in San Francisco by Al Di Meola, John Mclaughlin, and Paco de Lucia, if I'm pronouncing that right.
I think it's Paco de Lucia, isn't it? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, crazy album. And I'm not alone. I know there's a lot of guys like Zach Wilde. This is one of his favorites and whatnot. But this album was just sort of like, oh my God, I didn't know you could play like that on acoustic guitar. I had no idea. So that was another one that I kind of like, I wore it out. I wore the cassette out. I bought another one, bought the CD. I had the transcription book, like I said. And it's just sort of like, that was one that just made me go, okay, other forms of music there's some stuff out there that's more than
No, for people that haven't listened to, so Al Di Meola is the biggest on there, and even then, a lot of people haven't listened to him. So we worked with Rusty Cooley, and Rusty Cooley is one of the fastest guitar players on the planet. Everyone knows that he's like a technique master. John Petrucci has had him at his camp multiple years, and I don't want to say that Rusty. He's a confident guy, and he's really good, and he's fucking awesome. And I said, "Is there anyone that scared you at the camp?" Rusty's like, Al Di Meola. Al Di Meola. And I'm like, you have Jason Richardson, you have John Petrucci, you have I think maybe it was Tony McAlpine or something, like Al Di Meola. And I'm like, that's the guy. But then, you go listen to Al Di Meola, and you're right, because here's the thing. Playing electric guitar fast, it's one thing, and it's definitely a whole beast. But to play acoustic like Paco de Lucia, or to play like Al Di Meola or John Mclaughlin, who's just literally on a different wavelength. And if people haven't listened to these guys, they are, again, and you can understand in Kelly's playing why he's so technically proficient, because if you listen to a guy like John Mclaughlin, that guy is the epitome of out-of-the-box thinking, insane picking. Al Di Meola and John Mclaughlin, in fact, Conrad Simon and guys like Jimmy Bell and Rusty Cooley, who are ferocious pickers where you could hear them burning through their picks, that comes from the school of Al Di Meola, Paco de Lucia, and John Mclaughlin, because those guys, like when you think that like Yngwie Malmsteen was the first guy that did that insanity, maybe in the format of Beethoven and Paganini, but not better, superior, or before those guys right there. So that's really cool that you mentioned that, because that's deep into the well, because obviously Joe Satriani, everyone's heard of Joe Satriani. Not everybody, but like a lot of the guitar nerds have heard of Joe Satriani. But I love hearing stuff like Al Di Meola or Paco de Lucia or Mclaughlin, because Mclaughlin, like, again, what makes you like Mclaughlin? Why is he so cool to you, Kelly? Can you explain it? Because it's one of those things for me where I understand, but I can't articulate other than he's so innovative.
Well, the thing is, he's also covered a lot of ground. Like, if you hear the early stuff he's done with Mahavishnu Orchestra or whatever, and it's out there. It's out there, it's trippy, it's kind of jazz fusion, but aggressive. So he's done that kind of thing, right? And that's where he made his first big splash. That's where people kind of first took note of him. Him
with Jerry Goodman, by the way. Have you heard Jerry Goodman, Siobhán, on violin?
No, I don't think so.
He's the violinist for the Dixie Dregs, and if you want to hear a fucking insane violinist in a rock format, the first violinist
that's awesome. I can't believe I didn't know about this.
In 2000, when I saw the Dixie Dregs with Steve Morse, may I add, opening for Dream Theater, they had Jerry Goodman playing violin, and I remember it was the first time I ever saw a violinist other than Itzhak Perlman at Mechanics Hall. That was like, holy bananas, like what the flying hell is this? Continue. Yeah. Sorry for interrupting you, Kelly.
No problem. And actually, come to think of it, speaking of the Dixie Dregs, they also had a guy named Mark O'Connor.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep, I know Mark O'Connor for sure.
So imagine Steve Morse and him dueling away.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, he's gone through, back to Mclaughlin, he's gone through so many, and I don't even pretend to have heard all of it. Like, I have a whole bunch of stuff, and but I'm missing. I haven't heard the Miles Davis stuff. I haven't heard.
Well, so explain to people. He's played with Miles Davis. He's done experimental jazz fusion, which, if people don't understand what that is, that's basically like in 17/8.
Like jazz guitar playing is amazing. It's insane.
And you think, and here's the thing: is it's like deliberate nonsense.
He's done traditional jazz stuff, but some of my favorite John Mclaughlin stuff. If you haven't heard this, run, don't walk to your nearest record store and pick it up. Shock Teeth.
We don't have those anymore.
Shock Teeth.
Record store.
Shock Teeth.
SHATKI.
Should that be on one of her?
Shock
Should
Teeth.
that be on one of Siobhan's I Need to Learn This riffs?
Yeah, basically John and a few Indian players. Tabla. We have violinists. I think it's Levi Shankar. I might be wrong about
Ravi
that.
Shankar played the
Oh my
sitar.
God. You got to hear this. You got the first album.
I will. I want to look it up.
First album
Shock
is
Teeth.
live. The first album is live. How ballsy is that?
Snarky
Wow.
puppy style, huh? But not.
Shakti. I have to look this up.
Well, you know what? But here's the thing: is you're going again back to in the day, live a lot of the times was better. Like, so you hear bands like the Eagles, they sounded muted on the record to me because they played things slower. They were much more mellow. And then you go see Don Feldner and Joe Walsh live, Alcoholicated, and it was like, whoa, these guys aren't just a country band; they're a rock band. You know what I mean? But back in the day, you didn't have Pro Tools to hide behind, and you made everything perfect to a grid. So if you were Paco de Lucia, you would just go play for people because you were just that good. That's why people thought you were that good. It's not because Cory chopped you up and made you perfect to the grid, and then made you sound like Conrad, who just is an alien. People were actually that good. And that's one of the things I love about your playing, is because when we first met Kelly, you were not a learned engineer. You were a guitar player, which is what most people are. And, we had to walk him through stuff, but you weren't allowed to cheat because you barely even knew how to plug it into the computer. So, you know what I mean? Like, you're not going, like all these new guys are like, okay, if I line this up. So when we get a track from Kelly, we'd sometimes have to solo it. And we're like, oh my God, because you could hear the humanity in your playing. One of the things that I absolutely hate about a lot of modern metal music, a lot of modern shred music, is that it's so edited that the feel is taken out of it, and and some of the warts and some of the things that make something sound unique, that like Cacophony, if you listen to them again, it's tight, but it's not militant tight because they didn't line it up in Pro Tools. You had like a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old playing with reckless abandon. And that's what made it sound so good. So you could do it live because basically when you went into the studio, even like with Jason Becker and Marty Friedman, they were pretty much just recording live tracks and just getting it and then maybe overdubbing one or two things. Whereas nowadays we're like, let's do the drums this week, we'll do the bass that next week, we'll make sure we edit that, and then we'll put this on top of it, and when that's perfect, then we'll add these things. And it's a totally different process. So you could play live.
A lot of those guys have said, we were talking about like the Shrapnel era records and stuff on multiple occasions. You hear them say, well, you know what? We had a week and we had a budget constraint. So yeah, we had to get it done, and it is what it is. I've heard more say that. I'm sure all those bands, Cacophony, Racer X, whoever else, they probably didn't really have much time to do it. So you had to be rehearsed. You had to be ready to go, right?
Well, I mean, you see guys like Paul Gilbert, and like one of the things I love about Paul Gilbert, who was in Racer X, the band that you were talking about, whereas a lot of guys have gone towards the super uber shredder level, like the Jason Richardsons and some of the, and I have respect for it, total respect for this insane technique. A guy like Paul Gilbert, who was doing the insane technique, who literally did the video outside of Michelangelo Badio that I'm sure everyone has seen. Everyone has seen the videos that Paul Gilbert did in the 80s, as far as if you were trying to learn guitar. But on his newer music, he's chosen the road of tasty, as I call it. He's chosen to play slide guitar or to do something pleasantly weird, and he will still play fast notes. He's not like bumming people out by not showing technique, but he's much more interested in melodicism, and he's much more interested in writing a composed song with interesting changes than he is in going, let me program something on my computer to make it as weird as possible so that I can do something that no one's ever done before, and not even John Petrucci would have thought of it. Because, I mean, even if you listen to like the last a lot of the Dream Theater stuff, they're like, let's figure out what the weirdest thing is and blah, blah, blah. And I respect them so much for that, but there's something to be said for people who just organically play that way.
Yeah, and I want to get Kelly's perspective on kind of his compositional style, but we're actually coming up at the end of this segment here.
He's gonna have to stay more. We
we're
haven't
gonna
talked
have to do
him.
a part
We don't even
two.
know this guy.
We're gonna do another hour.
Did he just 2020 us? I'm like so fascinated. This is the first
Too
interview.
much good stuff to
where I'm
talk
just like,
about.
I want to know so much stuff for a personal reason because we have 3 records. And not just that, Kelly, we haven't even talked about it yet, and we can talk about it in the next podcast. But before Siobhán or Cory even walked into the picture, Kelly, myself, my brother, and Conrad had probably 1,000 pages, and this is not even an exaggeration. Like a year and a half,
typing
maybe.
Everything, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen,
Sure.
I may have typed the
You have
equivalent
1,000 pages on your own bed.
of the rest of the. Well, they probably Brian, Conrad, and Kelly were the equivalent of me. But 1,000 pages of us talking about this project early on and what we loved about guitar playing. And, Kelly would be like, oh, I'm going to go watch the hockey game. Or I'd be like, I'm going to the Metallica concert. And we'd all talk about our lives. And we were almost like a support guitar group for each other before this turned into this. So I want to say that it's great to talk to Kelly because we don't have a personal relationship in this respect, but we really have spent an enormous amount of time musically working together. Like doing he's always done trust falls into my music in the sense that I send him something. He never really argues with me and just sends perfect stuff back. And Cory can speak to this and Siobhán can speak to this. Every time we send something to Kelly, we never worry. We're never like,
yeah,
this is
it's
going to
always amazing.
He one time sent me something and said, I'm not sure if this is going to be it. And I said, oh, this is definitely it. And that was literally the only argument I've ever had with Kelly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have to have a part 2 of this.
So that said,
go a little deeper.
You guys have been fucking 2020. Turn back in. We're going to have the other episode up at some point soon. And hopefully you have the desire to see us again. And we miss you. But that said, thank you to Kelly for taking the time up in Canada. And to Cory and Siobhán for always indulging me. Because this podcast is very similar to my conversations with Kelly, where I just say things. And then they have like these awesome ideas. And then I say things. So if you haven't figured that out, that's 2020, 2020-d.com. And I also want to say thank you to our sponsor.
Yes.
Lost Symphony, our band,
Check it
Chapter
out.
1. Check it out. 2020. See you soon.